Greetings and welcome to Play or Not to Play. I'm Mtpy. Over the years, thousands of games have been made for people to enjoy, for all kinds of different systems by all kinds of different teams. More games have been made than it's possible to play over the course of an entire lifetime, and this series will look at some of the older games I've played throughout my life and if they're worth going back to today. Lords of Magic is a turn-based, grandish strategy game combined with a real-time battle component and RPG elements, very similar to the Total War series of games, only several years before that was a thing. The first Total War game being released in 2000 and Lords of Magic being released in 1997. The player can pick from one of several factions. There are 4 elemental factions of Earth, Air, Fire, Water, and they can pick from 3 other factions of Law, Chaos, and Life. The goal as any of these factions is to defeat the faction of Death. Upon winning the game once, you can then unlock the ability to play as the Death faction. The goal then is to kill everyone else. One of the great things about this game is that every faction has their own unique units, heroes, and magical creatures. You'll find a bunch of typically Tolkien creatures here, with humans, elves, dwarves being fairly common for playable races, but giants, fairies, and lizard folk are also some of the more visible races for certain factions. Summoned magical creatures run the gamut from unicorns to krakens to dragons to a phoenix. In keeping with the feeling of every faction as being its own group with its own units and heroes, each faction has its own playstyle. The dwarves of Earth are slower but more armored. The elves of Life are fast, lightly armored, and have great ranged units, but low health. The humans of Order are, as one might guess, well balanced between attack, armor, speed, and health. It does make each faction feel very unique and encourages multiple playthroughs to see how each faction works. In addition to unique units, each faction has access to its own spell tree with its own strengths and weaknesses based roughly on game lore of the faction. Earth has some good armor improving spells and things that slow down the enemy. Order has some great well-rounded army-wide buffs. Life has access to mid-combat healing and even resurrection spells. The spells used by wizard heroes play a major part in the battles of the game, and a high-level wizard can alter the course of combat on its own, but needs to be protected as they often have very poor stats in armor and health. One of the other great things about this game are the items, artifacts, and scrolls. In various dungeons around the world, these things can be found and then equipped on various heroes to give them more power and abilities. Each hero type of each faction has their own legendary artifact that can be found and used to devastating effect. The Earth Champion gets a weapon that lets it cast an earthquake over the battlefield, damaging every ground-bound enemy unit. The Life Mage gets a staff that lets them cast Resurrection for free several times a turn. These really get the player wanting to delve into those higher level dungeons in search of the next great item. But the game is not all great ideas. There are many aspects that can be samey, dull, irksome, or reduce future enjoyment. The first thing is that, though the factions each have their own units and stats, they're all based on the same tree. Every faction has one infantry unit type, one mounted unit type, one champion hero unit type, one ranged unit type, one thief hero type, and so on and so forth. While they each have different looks and stats, the core type of units is the same for every faction. In addition, every faction has the same capital city type with just a different picture overlay. All first level cities can only have a certain number of people earning resources, and the same goes for second and third level cities. Maybe seeing this as a problem, there are villages halfway between one capital city and the next that let whoever captures them build one building of a faction that borders the village. It goes without saying that you should always build one of the ones you don't already own. However, this comes with its own problems that I'll mention a bit later. Overall, the world map is pretty much the same every time the game is played, with factions always starting in the same place, the capital and outbuildings in the same configuration, and the same amount of dungeons in the same spots. It's not terrible for making the world seem consistent, but it does drop some of the replayability via exploration. This is mitigated by the inclusions of a couple different map varieties that can be loaded at the beginning of the game. In addition, the special edition of the game includes a variety of different scenarios, some based on real-world mythology and some based on the game's mythology. These offer a good way to expand the playing of the game with specific objectives and challenges. These include a Beowulf-type legend, an Arthurian-type legend, a legend about the early time of the Death faction, and a few more, but they can be really hard. In my opinion, one of the biggest drawbacks of the game is the combat. When you run into an enemy party, or delve into a dungeon, or attack another faction's city, the player can fight the battle on the map in real time with the pause button, very similar to Total War. Each army can only have 9 units and 3 heroes, and the battles are limited to one faction on each side. This limits the tactical options that are available. Added to this, when a unit is hit, it gets staggered a bit and stops moving or attacking. This creates an imbalance of the game in favor of ranged units. No matter how much armor an infantry has, certain ranged units are always going to be able to stun it, and the infantry will never be able to reach them. This makes factions with limited range, like Earth or Chaos, harder to play. One of the other major drawbacks is the economy, which is both a little bit complicated and pretty shallow. There are several different resource types, including gold, ale, crystals, fame, and followers. The capital uses followers to gain the other resources turn by turn and to recruit units, which usually leads to a lack of followers. In addition, the capital can only earn 8 of each resource at level 1, 16 at level 2, and 32 at level 3. And upgrading a city is pretty expensive. While it sounds like plenty, spending is very often uneven, and 32 income a turn will leave the resource the faction's strongest units require low, while having surpluses in other areas. You can exchange resources at pretty ridiculous ratios, and spoils from dungeons are generally not the best resource-wise. Because of the difficulty with resource income, and every unit requires at least one upkeep in a resource per turn, with stronger magical creatures taking multiple per turn, it means that your army is always stretched very thin, and a lot of the times your buildings can't be garrisoned in any meaningful way, which means you mostly just have one big army and a couple individual units. These two issues combine to create a game that delivers a lot of breadth but not a lot of depth. It could be because I've known and played the game for years, beaten it several times, and not much of it is new to me, but the game doesn't seem to have much staying power. It certainly is interesting almost as a proof of concept, and as Total War shows, it can be done extremely well. As far as Lords of Magic, I enjoy the world and the exploration, but there's nothing left for me to explore in the game. And the Total War series has surpassed it in the grand combat real-time strategy genre. As far as to play or not to play, I'd love to see this game re-envisioned and modernized, but as it is now, it would probably be more of a headache than a joy to anyone who isn't familiar with the game or games in the late 90s, which is a shame because it was a fairly novel concept to me, at least when it first came out.
Loaded and ready.
I feel a bit bad but I'd recommend giving this game a miss if you don't have any nostalgia for it or any interest in gaming history.
We have trained for this day. Here we go.
Let's get him.
Archers ready. Taking aim. Archers taking aim. Archers ready. Archers arrows locked.
Loaded and ready.
Archers ready. Taking aim.
Loaded, no problem.